Hey there, name's Tetravolt, and welcome to the first part of a two-part discussion video regarding two potential additions to the Naval Mode of War Thunder. This video is more or less meant to be something to listen to rather than watch. I'm experimenting with what kind of content will work out for the channel. Please let me know down in the comments below if this format is working for you or if it's not. I'll see what I can do. To save on time, the second topic of this video is going to be published later, though I'm not quite sure when the video will be ready when it's all said and done. This video is probably going to be the longest of the two, though that remains to be seen. With that said, let us begin. Introduction: The Power Creep. Recently, Gaijin dropped the trailer for War Thunder Edge, a mobile game adaptation of the game we all know and love. For a mobile game idea that feels like it should have come out at the peak era of mobile gaming, it looks fantastic from what we saw in the trailer. Combining air, ground, and naval on a mobile platform is quite ambitious, especially for a game the size of War Thunder. Although, when it releases, I do hope my phone can handle it, otherwise it's gonna be like Genshin Impact all over again, with my phone nearly melting. If you know, you know. The devs even said that at some point, they want to introduce two of the very things I want to cover with these videos. I am a bit miffed that mobile's possibly going to be getting these things first before PC, or that they'll just be mobile exclusives, which will leave their biggest community, the PC community, out on the fun. I want good things for War Thunder Edge, but I do hope that it's just a platform for new vehicles and mechanics to get ironed out before their PC debut, even if said debut is unlikely. But this small rant is key into leading into the main body of this introduction. Ever since its formal introduction to the game in 2018, Naval Forces has been expanded on rather quickly. What was initially intended to be a purely Mosquito Fleet game mode now boasts iconic ships from all the primary fighting nations, except for France at the time of this recording. America has Arizona and Alaska. Germany has some of her dreadnoughts from the High Seas Fleet era and the Scharnhorst. Russian players are able to helm the Kronstadt in-game. Britain has the father of all, Dreadnought, and the Mighty Hood. Japan has Congo and Fuso, and Italy just recently got the Andrea Doria. Overall, a rather decent overview of where things currently sit for most nations. In fact, almost all the big names are here. And that's the scary part. They're almost all here. Now, Tetra, you ask, what in the world do you mean by that? What's gotten you so scared that you wasted the time and effort into making these two videos? Well, dear listener, dear viewer, I'm referring to the big ones. The ones everyone and their grandmother and their dog and their father knows of. The names that have been lingering on the forum posts for years now. Iowa, Bismarck, Stalingrad, Revenge, Yamato, Littorio, and Jean Bart, just to name a few. They're coming. Everything I just listed has been passed to the developers, with exception to Jean Bart, because nothing French has been passed to the developers, which annoys me. I want a new nation to play, a new navy to play. Bigger ships not only mean bigger guns, but more anti-air guns. Do you see where I'm going with this? Engaging in battleship in game currently has 3 to 4 outcomes. You sink them, they sink you, or air power sinks you, or air power sinks them. The third and fourth outcome is more probable because most current battleships and dreadnoughts in game have little to no anti-air defenses, so taking them out, or at least dealing substantial damage, is possible. The same can be said for low-tier destroyers, and cruisers to an extent. Lord knows I've had a moment or two when an enemy bomber suddenly pops up saying, "Surprise, motherfucker!" and sends me back to the spawn menu or hangar in a fiery wreck. However, Like with later cruisers now, later light and heavy cruisers, as battleships advance in technology, they're going to be bristling with anti-air defenses, thus making it highly unlikely that air power is even going to get anywhere near them. A lone aircraft making an attack run on something like, say, a player-controlled Yamato is going to be torn asunder and left a smoldering oil slick on the water surface. Now, with my controls, I have purposely left my secondary batteries unbound from the primary batteries if there's anti-air ammunition available for those guns. Yeah, I let the AI control my secondaries with anti-air shells. Now, some games, the secondaries are quiet. No one's crazy enough to bring an aircraft into the game. Other matches, well, my gunners are scoring range kills against aircraft, or at least critically damaging them. And thus, my concern grows, because if I'm leaving the anti-air guns to the AI, who's to say other players won't, or already have? And this is where we begin to come into the main topic of the video. How do we keep these steel cathedrals in check? Now, barring a lucky hit on an ammunition rack, aka you hood somebody, engaging an enemy battleship on the surface is going to be tedious and lengthy as you try and you hack away at them and try and get that killing blow. To help, you bring in the very thing that replaced battleships as the flagship of any navy: aircraft carriers. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first part of the hypothetical update. Welcome to Update As Above, So Below. Part 1, the Air Arm. That's right, aircraft carriers. By technicality, most of the cruisers and battleships we have in game already can count as aircraft carriers. Sure, they only launch float planes that have a bomb or two, but they are vessels that carry aircraft. But for a true aircraft carrier to be in game, there are some mechanics that need to be brought together in order for them to work. Like I mentioned, cruisers and battleships can launch a float plane for scouting purposes. Most nations have their float planes on a dedicated turntable-style catapult, while the Italians have theirs on the bows of their cruisers that carry float planes. An example being the premium cruiser Pola. So, you take the catapult mechanic and add it to dedicated carrier-based fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers. Cool, now you can launch one of these three and hope for the best, right? Not exactly. If you've been around War Thunder for as long as I have, then you are aware of the single-player missions and campaigns that exist for the game. For those of you who haven't been around as long, or are relatively new to the game, congrats on learning something new about it. You have the option of purchasing the American or Japanese campaign packs from the Gaijin store, and you get some nifty premium aircraft for your troubles. Those aircraft being the YP-38, which was the pre-production P-38, and the A6M5 Cole, which is just a Zero that can carry a 250 kilogram bomb if I remember correctly. Within those missions, you take control of a flight of 4 aircraft to accomplish whatever task is set for you. You fly the lead aircraft, and the game's AI controls the 3 accompanying aircraft. For the most part, the AI follows you in formations and attacks on its own volition. Every time you lose an aircraft, you're prompted to switch over to the next available aircraft until the flight is wiped out. With this in mind, we turn back to the topic. Pardon me. A flight of 4 aircraft would greatly increase your chances at dealing damage, or outright killing, these mid to late war battleships. Here's a scenario. Say you take a flight of 4 Helldivers against a player-controlled Yamato. Let's repeat her final moments. As you approach, the secondary batteries start ranging you and sending flak your way. You manage to evade the flak long enough to enter your bombing run, and now all the AA guns are being trained on the flight. You enter the dive, and if you're a smart dive bomber pilot, you'll deploy your air brakes, so you don't rip your wings off. Now you're a bit slower, and the gunners can still target you. However, 4 targets mean more dispersion of the firepower being sent up toward you, whereas a single aircraft means it's getting all the firepower. Take any cruiser or battleship into a test sail and have the AI gunners take out the air target. You'll see what I mean. All that firepower against one aircraft. Your flight races towards the ship and into the first point of convergence for the guns. Bam! 1 aircraft down, 3 remain. You speed towards the ship. The player below you is making evasive maneuvers and you're adjusting to, compensate. The second gun convergence hits, and you lose 1, maybe 2 aircraft at that point. However, it wouldn't matter, as your final aircraft has gotten past the new convergence point and is able to drop off the ordnance. Bomb hits, damage done, maybe a lucky ammo detonation, and you speed off with the knowledge that you contributed to the fight. Catapults, carrier aircraft, and now AI wingmen to assist you in making interception runs or bombing runs. Now, what about the aircraft themselves? Part 2, the machines. As far as what aircraft you'd be allowed to use on a carrier, it really depends on the carrier herself. As technology got better and air power developed, carriers often switched out their air arms for better striking capabilities and air defenses. However, all large vessels in-game are presented at a particular time in their career. Most recently, Britain just got HMS Glorious in her 1919 appearance. Arizona is in her 1938 configuration and already has a decent battery of single-mount, dual-purpose 5-inch guns for air defense. The same would be applied to carriers. Let's look at USS Enterprise as an example. For her fighters, she used everything from Wildcats to Corsairs for a brief stint, Dauntlesses to Helldivers for her dive bombers, and Devastators to Avengers for the torpedo bombers. In the context of War Thunder, let's introduce Enterprise in her 1941 configuration. At the time America entered the war on December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, Enterprise carried Wildcats, Dauntlesses, and Devastators for her air arm. Overall, a fairly decent complement. Sure, they're no Hellcats, Helldivers, and Avengers, but they are good for what they are. However, you could improve the air arm via the upgrade modules. Let's take a look at the A-26B-10 from the American tech tree. You have 3 options of different nose-mounted armament, but you are required to research the corresponding modules before you're able to mount a different armament option. Pardon me. The same can be seen in German fighters like the later 109s and 190s. The same idea can be applied to carrier air arms. Want to use a flight of Hellcats? Research them. Tired of the Dauntless? Research the Helldiver. Want a faster torpedo bomber? You know the drill. Once all 3 new aircraft are researched, you'll be able to load them up with Enterprise and use them in matches. So we have the catapults, the wingmen, and the machines. But what about the carriers we'd be playing? Part 3, the Queen Bees. Depending on which test flight you go into with America, Russia, Japan, and Britain, you are loaded up on a carrier. The American naval test flights put you on Yorktown and Forrestal. Britain is set on what I'm assuming is Illustrious, and the modern carriers are Royal. Japan is set on Kaga, and Russia is set on their VTOL carrier Baku. There's already a handful of carrier models in-game, although the World War II based ones are in desperate need of having their models updated to current standards. For some reason, and I don't know if it's just me, but the World War II carriers feel too small in an odd way. It feels like I'm going to strike the conning tower each time I take off. As for the modern carriers, they are beautifully detailed. They even have functioning damage models, though this is for when they are objectives in naval enduring confrontation. There's even a user mission somewhere on War Thunder Live that allows you to take control of these carriers and use them. Now, I'm not aware every nation would have a carrier, but I'm just going to say this. If Russia can have the Kronstadt in-game, then Germany and Italy can have the Graf Zeppelin and Aquila. Hell, Germany and Italy even had some ships undergoing conversions to carriers. Add them in too to help flush out the carrier branches for the tech trees. In terms of how a carrier would defend itself, much like the air arm, its defenses would be based on the particular point of her career she's represented in. Going back to Enterprise, if her air arm is from 1941, then so would her anti-air defenses. At the time, she was rocking single-mount 5-inch guns, a handful of 1.1-inch Chicago pianos, and an array of 50 caliber machine guns. Pretty bare bones, but also very effective. If I had to guess, her 1941 air arm and defenses would probably put her at the battle rating of, say, 4.3 to 4.7, 5.0 at best. 4.3 would put her right at the cusp of being put against interwar and pre-war destroyers. Although, I can see it now. Someone finally gets the itch to play naval, and they decide, hey, I'm gonna start playing Japan. And then they get stuck with the Mutsuki. They get into a match, and it's a full up tier. An Enterprise player sees them and dunks on them with some dauntlesses from Bombing 6. In this case, Azure Lane Enterprise's catchphrase would work perfectly. Awarida! It's over. Sure, anti-air defenses are great and all, but what about a carrier's survivability? Part 4. Internally. A carrier's survivability is overall based on its construction. You have the massive hangar space directly beneath the flight deck, with all the living spaces, machinery shops, and other essential areas built beneath or around the hangars. For the most part, from what I've noticed, naval players tend to aim for the midships, trying to knock out the bridge, some fire directors, or the engine spaces and set you on fire. Shells penetrating the hangar are going to simply pass right through and deal no significant damage until the shell hits something substantial below or passes through the other side. Although, this whole point would be moot if the developers said, hey, the hangar space is like that of an ammo rack because you have aircraft, fuel, and ordnance in the hangar. Besides that, in real life, there's only 2 major instances that I can recall of a carrier succumbing to damage sustained by surface fire, and those are the cases of HMS Glorious being sunk by gunfire from Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in 1940, and USS Gambier Bay being finished off by the cruisers Tone and Chikuma after being attacked by a larger Japanese surface force during the Battle off Samar in 1944. The key factor to these sinkings, however, is how long it took the ships to finally be sunk by the gunfire. Glorious took roughly 3 hours to sink from initial engagement to final shell impacts, whereas Gambier Bay took roughly, if I remember correctly, about an hour and a half to succumb to her damage and capsize. Now, comparing the time it took these carriers to sink is rather ridiculous, as one outclasses the other, but their construction and survivability are what determined how much time they had left. Glorious was converted from a battlecruiser, a shallow draft battlecruiser meant for the Mediterranean. They turned into a carrier. A battlecruiser hull is going to have the survivability for it to live, whereas Gambier Bay was just hodgepodge put together and said, go. In stark contrast to these, though, like with the sinkings of Akagi and Hornet, their fates were done in by air power, where Akagi was eventually scuttled by her escorts, and Hornet was finished off by Japanese vessels because her escorts failed to scuttle her. Hornet went down saying, fuck you. In essence, carriers are double-sided blades. While they can send out and deliver devastating airstrikes, they too can be kept in check by enemy surface vessels or aircraft. Killing a carrier, depending on if it's a fleet carrier like Akagi or an escort carrier like Gambier Bay wouldn't be all too dissimilar to trying to land a killing blow on a cruiser or a dreadnought. But this leads us into the fifth section of this topic, the maps. Part 5, the maps. When Naval came into the game with update 1.83, Masters of the Sea, it was meant to purely be coastal vessels like PT boats, gunboats, subchasers, with destroyers and one cruiser as the big guns. The maps themselves reflected this. You still have 2 zones for coastal vessels to fight over, with a single zone for the blue water vessels to fight over out in open water. Eventually, though, we started getting larger cruisers, and soon enough, dreadnoughts came. The tech trees were even split into dedicated tabs for coastal and blue water. Naval, as I stated at the start of the video, has evolved and changed quite a bit since 2018. But the one thing that hasn't changed are the maps. They're still in their pre-dreadnought sizes and layouts, and introducing a carrier into these arena-style maps would be, and is, a death sentence. Aside from friendly battleships on your team, you might as well be a barn compared to them. And the moment one enemy ship looks at you, all the guns in the fleet are aimed at you. Because big flat top, big squishy target, let's take out the carrier, her. However, there is one game mode that can better accommodate carriers: Enduring Confrontation. The maps here are larger, often incorporating entire islands to sail around, and matches are slated for being 4 hours long, although depending on the competency of your team, matches in Enduring Confrontation don't last that long. Maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours max. Like I said, it really depends on how well the team works together. Spawning in a carrier in an EC match would allow the player time to plan ahead and ready themselves for the incoming enemy. For Christ's sake, the enemy fleet's on the other side of the map, miles away from you. It's going to be a while before they even realize, hey, there's a carrier over there. Let's go get them. In that time, you could launch a flight of fighters for your combat air patrol, or send off a flight of bombers and have them circle around an area of the map as the player waits for the right time to strike. We have the circling mechanic for drones at top tier. Why not slap that in there too for, switching control? And that way your aircraft don't fly off the edge of the map. You can just send them somewhere, have them circle, and then you come back when you need them. If you've played Battle Stations Midway and Battle Stations Pacific, I'm referring to how carriers played in those games. If you remember that, you control the carrier, bring up the TAC map, you tell your flight, hey, go from here to here, and it'll start circling once it gets to that point you wanted them to go to. That's what I'm remembering. Maybe something similar could be done. With Enduring Confrontation in mind, the game modes for Naval would have to be changed up to better accommodate as well. Part 6, Shoo Arcadey. Changing up the game mode roster wouldn't be a first for War Thunder. It happened with simulator battles a few years back. Now, you find simulator battles under the Events and Tournaments tab, right there with Naval EC. And the thing with Naval EC is that it's open on select days with no prior announcement, and the game mode swaps between arcade and realistic after a certain time frame. The day could start with realistic, but the day could end with arcade. This kind of makes it a tad bit infuriating on trying to catch a particular game mode, especially when, someone like me has prior commitments to schoolwork and actual work outside of the house. It'd be nice to know when you're running Enduring Confrontation for Naval, Gaijin. It really would, so that way I can plan ahead and be like, okay, I can knock this out beforehand, and I can just go sit down and play some realistic Enduring Confrontation. That's all I'm asking. My reasoning is that EC is set up this way because for some reason it's probably still being tested and benchmarked, though I can't even imagine why that would be in the first place. It runs pretty well as it stands. That being said, I don't think it'd be too damaging to the naval game mode if arcade and realistic were completely gutted and replaced with their enduring confrontation equivalents. The maps in EC are laid out and balanced way better than any recent maps put into naval. Looking at you with extreme malicious intent, Golden Bay, you absolute trash fire. I'm going a bit of a tangent here. Yes, it's cool that we have a map based on the San Francisco Harbor and Harbor Inlet, but you could at least move the sea point over to Alcatraz. Let us fight over Alcatraz, for Christ's sake. I mean, spawning in a coastal vessel and trying to capture A and B between all the cargo freighters and the yachts and the pleasure craft, that's already annoying enough as it is, because you got itty-bitty little campers sitting there behind a fucking cargo freighter and just mowing you down the moment you even round a corner. That's already aggravating enough as it is. But spawning into sea out in the harbor inlet and just sailing into the objective, slugging it out at... Honestly, it doesn't even feel that like that's much of a distance to be slugging it out at. I mean, I shouldn't be able to take a cruiser. I've been trying to work through Italian cruisers lately. I shouldn't be able to take an Italian cruiser, spawn at sea, and go chill out in A and B. I shouldn't be allowed to do that. I know map design and balance has been an absolute topic for War Thunder lately. The idea that, you know, the developers don't play their maps, I'm starting to believe it. Because then, look at Golden Bay. I don't think they played it. End of tangent. And, end of the video, actually. I would like to thank you for just sitting back and listening to me ramble about carriers and how they could work in War Thunder. Every time I try and bring it up in discussions on some Discord servers, I get some people who agree with me and share in the excitement and start flushing things out. And then I get the others who purely say, carriers are dumb, or that naval is a dead game mode, who cares about dumb boats, I just want my Leopards and T-80s and I like missiles. I mean, naval isn't as dead as simulator, or as dumb as helicopter PvE. I tried playing some matches of helicopter PvE. Black sharks for as far as the eye can see, dunking on everything and everyone. I'm just sitting there in my little XM30 Huey, trying to do something with it, and a black shark keeps tagging me, and I'm just sitting there like, well, this is a waste. But so are helicopters. With naval, it just needs fresh content to stay relevant and something to keep these beasts in check. For me, naval is a nice change of pace from the grind of air and ground. Its gameplay is straightforward, sail and shoot, whereas with ground you have to find the best positions on a map or know exactly where to penetrate an enemy tank. Air is also an exercise of mental gymnastics with a variety of factors. Naval? Easy mode. Just disconnect your brain and enjoy the broadsides. Sure, the grind is just as lengthy in air and ground, but sometimes it really doesn't feel like it. And then you go look in your tech tree, remember that tier 5 frigates like USS Hakeem over there in America is 380,000 points and you just want to cry. A lot. But I want good things for naval. It's a sandbox that gives everything under the sun a chance to live again in a virtual environment. Same can be applied for air and ground. It's a sandbox. Anything's possible. However, the power creep is real, and they are coming. The big ones. History has shown and proved to us that aircraft crippled Bismarck and outright sank Musashi and Yamato. Granted, there's other factors going on with those, but for the general overview, air power crippled and sank them. They were the 3 biggest vessels of their kind, and they were disabled or sunk outright by air power. In order to prevent them and others from absolutely shit-stomping in the sandbox that is War Thunder, in naval in general, carriers and submarines are needed in order to keep these iconic beasts in line. Huh? Oh, my last line? I said something other than carriers. Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess I did. Well, coming up in part 2 of Update As Above, So Below, submarines.